Hi, I'm Thomas Graves, and welcome back to the Black Mold of Grief. In this episode, we're going to talk about the first stage of grief, which is denial. And I'm going to do a deep dive into my tells and how I know I'm in denial and how I lie to myself about being in denial.
Denial for me took a little bit to understand because I knew that I was not denying the facts of the deaths of my loved ones. I knew that my first two moms were gone. I knew Jenny was gone. I knew my sister was gone. I knew my nephew Matthew was gone. My dog Leo was gone. So I knew that I was not denying any of those things. But I slowly figured out I was denying how much pain I was in because of their losses. And I was denying that I needed to process their pain and feel the pain of those losses in order to move forward. My denial of that need to feel the pain in order to move forward started back when I was 2 and 3 and 6, because I started losing my mom when I was 2 and she passed. I lost her whole family of 50 cousins, aunts, uncles, grandparents, great aunts and uncles when we separated from them when I was 3, and I have no memories of them. So I didn't know I needed to grieve them, but I still kind of felt their pain. And then when we moved to Houston when I was 6, and we made the promise at the bottom of the stairs that we would present our new mom as the only mom we ever had, I buried all that pain again. And so pretending that I didn't need to deal with the pain was simply a way of life from the very beginning. And I just thought that's what you did. So as I moved forward in life, particularly starting high school, college, I noticed that other people were happier than I was. But because denial was such a strong factor and wired so deeply, it didn't occur to me that that was the issue, because that's just the way I thought. The theory that I came up with was that some people were just born happy and some people just weren't. And the same way that some people are born tall, some people are born short, some people are born musical, some people are born athletic, some people are born for what I began to call primary happiness, which was happiness for the sake of happiness, joy for the sake of joy. And some people were born for a life of secondary happiness, which was happiness through service and giving a life of service to help other people find happiness, but not deriving happiness from that life of service, not necessarily joy in a primary sense. And so I just thought that was what my life was going to be, that I just didn't get the happiness gene. And so with that belief, I never pursued releasing my pain because I just didn't think I was in pain. I thought I hadn't been given the happiness gene. And so I pursued a life of service. And so after college, I actually volunteered on the suicide hotline for a couple of years. And I developed another little personal theory. I noticed that a lot of people that were dealing with things that were calling in, they were late 20s to early 30s. And that's when things from their past were really starting to bubble up. And being in my early 20s and out of college and starting to find my way, and not really experiencing my own problem, so to speak, because again, I wasn't acknowledging anything at that point, but beginning to realize I was starting to kind of find my way and having to make decisions I wasn't having to make previously. I came up with what I call the exoskeleton theory, where the point of this is I could see it in other people, but I could not see it in myself. That's the point of this story. But when you're young and there's trauma of whatever kind, and you're not dealing with it, you don't develop a spine. And I'll talk about myself, move this to the first person. I didn't develop a spine and a skeleton. I developed an exoskeleton because of all of the structure of childhood with school and all those kinds of activities. And then, when you're going to go to college, or if you're not going to college, when you first get out, you're going to do this, that, and the other. And so there's all these expectations and advice, and you're kind of making decisions based on what people do expect of you. So there's a structure to it. And then when you hit your mid 20s and a little bit after, people stop giving you that direction. And so the exoskeleton of life starts to fall away. And if you don't have a interior skeleton, then you start to fall apart. And that's what I noticed in other people when I was working the suicide hotline, but it never clicked on me that I would be experiencing that at some point in my own life. Because again, I wasn't having problems. I just didn't have the happiness gene. I was going to have a life of secondary happiness, and that's what my lot was. So I moved on to other things. I was in the restaurant business and I ended up moving to Nashville when I was 30. Started working in at Goodwill, and was working with about 70 folks that had a range of disabilities. It was a very fulfilling job. I loved it, and I did that during normal business hours, which I'd never done before because I was always in restaurants. And then on nights and weekends, I was pursuing songwriting and doing workshops and writers' rounds and networking, and I was really doing great and enjoyed it. And then one day, I had this very random thought of suicide. And it was very, very brief, but it was very, very real. And with my training from the suicide hotline, I literally thought, well, that was weird. And so the suicide hotline advisor part of me was thinking that was not good, but the other part of me was truly just confused. I was like, am I depressed? I mean, why? That's just such a weird thing. I'm so happy. Why would I have that thought? And so switching gears slightly to the suicide counselor part of me, for any of you that have random thoughts of suicide, I had a very clear thought of how I would die by suicide. And my thought was I would get a plane ticket, fly down to the Caribbean somewhere, rent a boat, drive it out to wherever till it ran out of gas, then jump overboard and swim until I drown. I have no idea why that was the plan, but it was a very clear plan. So if you have a very clear plan, that is not good. So you need to go get help immediately. I knew that as somebody who used to answer the phone, but as a person who had that thought, who believed they were happy, it did not register. And I didn't go to a therapist for another 4 years because I was in denial. And that is how powerful denial is, that somebody who's trained to help other people, still, it didn't click within themselves. So I literally was just confused. And this confusion lasted for several years, even though there were lots of things that should have broken through the confusion. And one of them was, at some point, I started ordering 2 large pizzas on Friday night. And I would eat those over the whole weekend. And I would only leave my apartment on Saturday morning for a prayer group, and then Sunday evening for mass. And that was it. And again, obviously a sign of depression, but I was in denial. And I just thought I was trying to save money so I could go into the studio to record another demo. And so I spun it into a positive that I was being responsible with my money. There were also several instances, at least two that I can remember, probably more, where I would be at the checkout line at the grocery store and the person behind me would literally reach over and pat me on the back and rub my shoulder and say, it's going to be okay. And I would look at him like, okay, I mean, thank you, but I don't know why you're doing this. Like, I just, and it happened at least twice. So obviously they could see something, but it didn't register that I was depressed. And at that point, I had started waiting tables, and there was one gentleman. I'd taken the order, and so I was, collecting the menus back. And one gentleman, when I went to take his menu, he held on to it, and so I was kind of tugging at it, and he wouldn't let it go. And so finally, I looked at him, and he looked at me, and he said, "It's okay to smile." And he wasn't being mean, and he wasn't being sarcastic. He was being genuine and compassionate. And again, I just was like, okay, I don't know why he's saying this to me, but thank you. And I kind of took the menu and left. And then there was another gentleman and his wife. They were in for their anniversary, and they were there for probably an hour and a half or so for the dinner. And I, at this point, was a very what I call executional waiter. So I was a quiet waiter, yes, sir, yes, ma'am, that kind of thing. I didn't really engage in a lot of conversation. I was beginning to kind of process things a little bit. So I was very polite and quiet. And so this couple was great. But at the end of the meal, the wife said, "Can you sit down with us for a second?" And so the restaurant was kind of dying down at the time. And so I said, sure. And I sat down, and she said, "I don't ever do this." She said, "But I just feel the need to tell you every time you walk by that God loves you so much, and you have no clue how many people love you. Like, I just feel the need to tell you this." And again, I was very touched, but again, confused. And so when I ran the gentleman's credit card at the end, it was actually, I recognized his name. He's a big Christian music producer. But all of these things, and I had people at church several times where I would stay after to pray. And, I went to a church that was a cathedral and had sat 1,000 people. And so I would be off somewhere to the side. So people would have to search you out to go meet you after church because it was so huge. But people would, and they would 2 or 3 times come up and hand me a prayer card, or they would ask if there was anything special that I would like them to pray for. But I just had this sadness about me that I kept denying. And it wasn't, again, till later that I did start to heal. But the point of all of this is how powerful denial can be. Because I had all these other people, a lot of them complete strangers, knowing that I was depressed, and I was completely clueless, wondering why they kept asking me if I was okay, if they could pray for me, and reassuring me that it was okay to smile, and all those things. That's just how powerful denial can be. And so now when it comes to processing pain and approaching it, I've kind of adopted the Buddhist approach to pain in terms of denial. And how the Buddhists approach pain is they assume that life will have pain, and that is not to walk around with a dark cloud over your head where you're just moping all the time. The purpose of that approach is so that when pain occurs, it doesn't surprise you, and you can immediately begin to fix the problem and solve the problem faster. But if you approach life with the sense that pain's not going to happen, then when it does happen, you have to spend time adjusting to the existence of pain. And that wastes your time when it comes to solving the pain. And so now that's kind of my approach, especially because of my denial started so young and it became such a factor woven into my DNA of how I looked at things, that I just assume that I am in pain and I'm denying it, that I look for it and I scan for it like a CAT scan, and I'm just looking and looking. And if I find it, then I, approach it and I feel it and I find it and I free it. But then if I scan and scan and scan and I don't see it, then it's a good day and I move on and I enjoy the day and it's a great day. But that's my approach to denial so that I don't get stuck in it. I assume the pain is there until I can prove that it isn't. I wanted to do a reggae version, and I had an artist in Green Baker from Nigeria that I was listening to, and he was asking me if I wanted him to do a reggae version or Afrobeat, and I didn't know those genres well enough to steer him in which direction. So I told him to imitate one of my favorite songs of his. And I said, just get the band back together. So whoever helped you with that song, just get them together and do the best version of this song in that vein. And so this is more of an island version than specifically reggae, but with his accent and the whole groove and feel of it, it is just puts a smile on my face every time I hear it. And I call this my wedding conga line version. I just hear it being played at a wedding, and that's one of those moments where if you've lost somebody, you're going to wish that they were there, but that's kind of the point of the song, is that that's one of those moments that you'll want to share with your loved one when you get to heaven and share the joy of that moment with them.
I said the memories I make at the end of every day, scoop up and stack you like, and I'll take them all away. Then I'll pick one you want, dig up the bin that's there, breathe on till it's gone. So I have more to share. In our first conversation, it never.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of The Black Mold of Grief. Next week, we're going to do a deep dive into the second stage of grief, which is anger. And I hope in the meantime, something I've said here today helps you bring a little more joy to your first conversation in heaven.